Hello and welcome to our very first episode of Earth Talks in 2021. I couldn't have asked for a better set of people to kickstart our discussions this year. I have with me Arunabha Ghosh. She's the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. I have with me Mahua Acharya. She's the head of Convergence, that is EESL's new energy firm. I'm going to start the discussion with Arunabha. My first question to him. This is being touted as the most important year when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis, so much so that even the Human Development Report by the UN in 2020, in fact, in December 2020, made climate as central to the measure of human progress. Now, as one of the contributors to this report, as someone who has worked in the past on the Human Development Reports, Arunabha, I found it path-breaking, this report. So what was the thought process behind this change in the measurement of human progress, especially in a year when we're all so preoccupied with the pandemic and its impact on all of us?
Bahar, thank you for having me on Earth Talks, and it's great to be in this dialogue with you and Mahua. For 30 years, the Human Development Report has been trying to push the boundaries in terms of how we measure and monitor human progress, and that's why the shift away from very narrow indicators on looking at GDP or GDP per capita has always been part of the HDR's philosophy. That said, in its 30th sort of edition, it took that step further beyond looking at just humans and progress of humans, but to looking at what is the impact that is having on the planet. And that's why the report titled Human Development and the Anthropocene, the geological age in which we are currently, where human beings are now impacting the planet in such a way that it's having not just localized impacts, but overall planetary impacts for us and other species. It's important to capture that. Now, how was that captured? It was captured by adjusting what is already a well-known indicator, the Human Development Index, but adjusting it against the planetary impact. So the planetary impact adjusted HDI now demonstrates that no single country, even the countries with the highest HDI, actually have a planetary adjusted HDI which is higher than that value, which means every single nation on the planet is effectively drawing down resources more than what they are contributing to or replenishing. And that actually should give us pause. Because if we are even selfishly to be interested in human progress alone, then our actions today and our actions for the last several centuries are going to fundamentally not just devalue the way we measure our progress right now, but fundamentally take away the resources that are there for our children, grandchildren, and so forth. And that's at the heart of sustainable development. So this is really the mantra that the Human Development Report this year has tried to bring out.
And how much do you think this will curry favor with policymakers who are right now so preoccupied with fixing the economy? Do you think that this measure could have come perhaps a year later when leaders would be more inclined to listen? Do you think it's going to get buried in the headlines?
It could potentially get buried in the headlines, just like conversations about green recovery tend to get buried in the headlines. But we cannot wait for just political moments to put forward ideas and measures that require attention. So yes, the Human Development Report puts forward in a very important year a new measure of human progress. It will be incumbent on policymakers, politicians, researchers, academics, think tanks to look at what that means.
Yes.
And when we start measuring it, when we realize that we are already in one of the most vulnerable countries here in India, when we realize that 2020 was the hottest year ever recorded in line with 2016, when we realize that we've already gone through unprecedented planetary level shocks, then we have to look and make sense of that situation. It cannot be something that you can merely wish away. When it will get translated into national policy frameworks or international guidelines that compare countries accordingly, That's, of course, a question open to political processes. But I wouldn't hold back on the idea just because a particular political moment does not exist.
Right. And as it's being said, there is no vaccine for climate change and there is no time to pause. So, Mahua, I think this is a good point to get you into the conversation. You've worked in the international public sector, you've worked in the private sector. What made you enter the rough and tumble world of a public sector unit? And how do you think this new role that you've taken on can contribute to greater change on the energy front?
Firstly, Bahar, thank you so much for this. Thank you for inviting me, and it's so lovely to be with you and Arunabha on the show. I find myself in state of shock every now and then at the decision I've made. But then this decision is also a very natural one. I've worked in international public sector. I've worked in very, very hardcore private finance. I was in mergers and acquisitions in a very Wall Street kind of environment. I decided to take the plunge, so to speak, and get into public sector government, into actually government, because I feel that this is for three reasons. It is my personal choice to act. I want to access scale, and this is the mechanism for me to reach the kind of impact I'd like to make at scale. It's not always easy to do that from the outside, to achieve impact and scale together, and I feel government gives me that platform. Second, in terms of timing, this is a really good time as far as renewables is concerned. And it's a really good time for different reasons. Solar is in fact the cheapest energy source. It is also a good time because we are, and I'll get into some more details a little bit later, battery prices are coming down. It's becoming a very normal choice. It's a normal discussion. And for the first time, you have high technology applications for rural India as much as the very serious big grid. So with this kind of, plus of course, the concerns around climate change are not getting, you yourself know that they're not getting any lighter. If in fact, yes, they get buried in the headlines, but there's this background going on renewable energy and the market. And I felt that these two things put together, this is a good time for me to take the plunge. I also have the energy in order to start a new company, and I'm starting it from scratch. I've been privileged to be even given this opportunity to do it inside the government.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to it. It's very exciting.
Very exciting. And for listeners and viewers who don't understand what is Convergence, if you can take us through what is your mandate, what is the mandate of this new energy firm, how is it going to be different from other PSUs of the government?
Sure. So in the interest of viewers, Convergence Energy is a subsidiary of state-owned Energy Efficiency Services Limited. It's a subsidiary that I'm looking to make investments in business models that use solar power, so green, clean, affordable, and reliable applications of renewable energy for rural India as much as for the grid and urban India. So as far as technology is concerned, yes, it's likely going to be solar, but it's also going to be batteries. And there's a very exciting world out there about batteries. So I'd like to be able to use battery-based solutions to provide reliable power, meaning I can schedule when the power will come. Clean, so it will most likely going to be solar because it's the cheapest applications, and you can make them quite small as much as you can make them quite big. And affordable, the means of getting this sort of combination out into rural livelihoods needs a mechanism around investment structures and financial structures.
Yes.
So I come from, I would like to use the background that I have accumulated over the years of using public sector money plus pretty hardcore private sector kind of capital to bring into underserved markets.
Right. And
So
I remember you were giving me in previous conversations you and I have had in the past, and this is something which even Arunabha has been saying repeatedly in his conversations, that this is a great time for renewables. So how does, Mahua, that translate into action on the ground? Could you give us examples of where, what states you'd be working in, or what villages? And again, since you said scale, what is the scale you're looking at?
Sure. So let me say something. Let me start with let's start at the village level. Agricultural power in India is subsidized or free, or
Yes.
provided at free of cost to farmers. We have about 20% of our generation in India that is basically completely subsidized. Now, if I were to come in and replace that without changing anything for the farmer, I'd come in and replace that amount of power supply at half the cost of what the grid is otherwise having to spend. Then not only am I benefiting the grid, am I benefiting just our distribution companies are in enormous financial stress. But I'm also now providing daytime power. Agricultural power to farmers is usually provided at night. So they have to get up in the middle of the night and go switch on their pumps. Now, if we were able to provide cheap power to the grid, as far as the farmer is concerned, there's no big difference to him as far as green power versus any other kind of power, except that now the power comes during the day at a time when he or she can switch on the pump at will. Yeah. Now, where does the scale come in? As a government entity, we will work through the discoms.
Okay.
If I were a private entity, I would have to set this up on my own and take a village and set up perhaps a grid and then connect each of the pumps and each of the appliances in the homes. But here, as a public sector entity, I can come in and access through the grid at the last feeder that feeds a certain village. And while I'm doing that, can also change the cooking appliances. There's a lot of really bad cooking practices with a lot of, the chulas basically that burn wood. Yes. And in the homes of these in the kitchens of these homes, it's very smoky and it's quite bad for indoor air pollution is pretty bad. So we can go in and since I'd be able to access clean energy supply to these homes, I can also come in and change the cook stoves, change the lighting, change the pumps, change whatever else they're doing.
Okay.
I can only do that as a government large-scale entity that gets hold of that village through the discom, through the grid.
Right. Okay, very interesting. Mahua, if I can perhaps bring you back into the conversation, this is the age of technology glitches. So if you can tell us, now you've said, you said before this also, this is an exciting time for the renewable energy sector. But you yourself have also pointed out that there are problems in terms of what is required as far as investment in technology is concerned. And I know while domestically, yes, you have the government backing you, but internationally, there are a lot of struggles for India, not just India, but many other developing countries have been saying that the developed world needs to pay for the technology. So how do we make that happen? And how do we make climate finance a reality?
Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you for that, Bahar. Let me just also make one little point about a question you asked, Arunabha, climate shock.
Yes.
In India, our water tables are falling. They're going lower and lower. So I talked about changing the pumps. These pumps need to get bigger and they need to go deeper. And over the last 15 years, the water tables, as far as I have seen it, have fallen by about 200 feet to 300 feet.
Yes.
So that's only climate shock, right? So it's happening all over. What's going on the finance part? It's not, what is needed is public finance has to come closer to private finance. They don't speak the same language.
Right.
Public finance thinks in terms of grants, things in terms of subsidies, and things in terms of what that application of those grants and subsidies very for the full capital or over time. Private finance thinks of returns. So private finance looks at it very differently. Public finance also cannot sit close. Cannot sit part of the same investment or finds it difficult to do that. So I think what's needed is for one, public and private need to come together, closer together. What do I mean by that? you would have heard of, people talking about blended finance.
Yes.
The risks that are there in these sorts of new opportunities. If we were to supply affordable, reliable power to our rural masses, you need batteries.
Right.
Batteries are expensive.
Yes.
To bring the cost down of batteries, either you deploy them at scale and wait for prices to come down, or you interject now with a financial structure that makes it affordable, which means that you buy down the cost of batteries. A lot of public international finance is willing to do that.
Okay.
I know of philanthropies that are willing to do that. So what do they need? They need a platform that puts it out there. An international philanthropy is not going to manage to go around the country looking for investment opportunities. They just don't have the hands and legs for that. So they're looking for these sort of platforms that are semi-structured, where they can come in, where there's a proposal that says, if you put in 10% of investment, I can make this battery storage, high technology viable.
So are you saying to me that would be perhaps your platform would be one of them?
I definitely, it's the intention. Yes, I'd like to use even carbon credits. They make about a 10% difference to an investment, 10 to 12%. In the era that there was a strong market, we only got carbon credits as an afterthought. So it came as really nice, great foreign exchange revenue, but it came sometimes as after the fact. Now we are in the situation where if we have to stabilize our grids and we have to add more renewables into them and also solarize rural India, we need to bring these incentives up front. And then if it makes a 10% difference to the investment on foreign exchange terms, that's very, very powerful. Very powerful.
Okay.
So this is the kind of financial structuring that we need to do.
That's very
and that I would like to do.
Okay, so Arunabha, we lost you there for a minute. But thank you so much for joining back again. I'm going to quickly ask you that same question again, because I think the train of thought may have got broken. As I had mentioned, you wrote in your op-ed in the Hindustan Times that all our attention is focused on vaccine delivery, economic recovery, and we're not looking at climate shocks. So what are these shocks that you're mentioning here, and how can we prepare for something that hasn't happened yet? And I admit I asked this as a very provocative question.
And Bahar, as I said, I'm suitably provoked because it's not that the climate shock hasn't happened yet. We are already in the middle of a climate crisis. So let's unpack some of these shocks. Let's take extreme weather events. Between 1999 and 2018, that 20-year period, the world as a whole went through 12,000 extreme weather events, which cost the world more than $3.5 trillion in terms of damages. Here in India itself, while between 1970 and 2005, we experienced about 250 extreme weather events, such as droughts, floods, or cyclones, since 2005, we've experienced 305 and counting. So the point is, the frequency and the intensity of these extreme shocks are already rising. Now, they have associated impacts. So when you have extreme drought, you have then an impact on food productivity. You have impact on water recharge in the ground. When you have cyclones or extreme flooding events on the coast, you have an associated impact in terms of the infrastructure damage, not just the lives lost. So you asked, how do we then prepare ourselves for it? Number one, we've got to try and get a handle on how bad it's going to get. And unfortunately, no developing country on the planet today has a high resolution climate risk atlas. What I mean by that is, at a city level or sub-city level, you don't have an idea of how climate change is going to impact you. So if you're going to build a bridge, connecting Amravati to Guntur, you don't know how climate change is going to impact that multi-million-dollar investment. And if you don't have that, back to the innovative financing issues that Mahua was talking about, you can't insure such capital investments. So we need to put in what I call investigate the impact of the historical or the relationship between the historical hazards that we've been facing and how those get aggravated by a climate crisis. Number two, what we have to do is translate this information from something that only climate scientists look at to what a policymaker can understand, and even more importantly, how vulnerable communities can understand it.
Yes.
After the 2011 Fukushima nuclear accident, Japan completely overhauled its emergency response structures, where it brought in new curricula into the school system. So how will school children respond in an emergency? How will
Right.
households respond? If you don't involve the communities in that response, you're only expecting that the fire brigade will show up because some immediate event has happened. And number three, what has to happen, and again, I'm looking to Mahua as well, is we've got to create the financial structures that not only bring the insurance industry into the developing world facing climate shocks, but on the other side, use financial inclusion to get the most vulnerable into the insurance bucket. So
Yes.
you need a two-pronged approach on innovative financing. Developing countries can't be a blind spot for insurance industries. And within developing countries, the vulnerable communities cannot be outside of the financial ecosystem. So
Right.
if we could do these three things, a climate risk atlas, involving the communities in the response, and innovative financing to create the insurance cushion, then we are looking at something that can help us respond more strategically to the climate shocks we are already facing.
Very interesting, Arunabha. What I like in what you just said is you also gave us a roadmap for the future, because I think with all climate talks, we're just talking about doomsday scenarios, and we're not always giving what needs to be done. We're almost at the end of this show, but I would like you to play, both of you, climate astrologers. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, there is, the COP26, which is going to happen in Glasgow. Hopefully it will happen this year. So I'd like to ask your predictions for 2021. What do you think is going to happen at these climate talks? What is your prediction? Arunabha, you first, and then Mahua.
Number one, I expect within the first 100 days of the Biden administration, they're going to come out with something big on what the US will do, not just to get back into the Paris Agreement, but also upgrade its own ambition. Mm-hmm. Number two, I expect some serious conversation around loss and damage and climate risks. Yes. It's already happening within countries, within the OECD and so forth. I think this conversation will get elevated. And number three, there is going to be, I hope, a serious conversation of climate finance and sustainable finance that goes beyond the negotiating ploy of the $100 billion. We need trillions in green investment and sustainable investment, the scale that we've all been talking about. And I hope that 2021 is at least the start of a serious conversation about this.
Right. Mahua, over to you.
I have three predictions.
Okay.
I'll start with trust first. I think the UN system was lacking in trust. The parties just started to, a developing country versus the others. People did not trust the US administration. So I think the US coming in and the Biden administration coming in will help hugely in the re-establishment of trust. They used to be there to some extent in the UN process. This will be my 20th COP. So it's kind of going up and down. So one, I think trust will make somewhat of a comeback. As far as climate finance is concerned, I feel that the US coming in will also mean that other countries will start to capitalize on, make good on their own commitments. There have been commitments made by countries, which somehow were linked to, if the biggest entity doesn't perform, then there's this should I go first or should I just wait kind of scenario. And I feel some of that will come back to the table. Others will feel there will be some level of peer pressure to come in and make good on commitments. So the Green Climate Fund may well be additionally capitalized. Other institutions like this may be capitalized, they may be strengthened. So more climate finance, real commitments, but more than commitments, in fact, making good on past commitments. So a re-establishment exercise will probably happen. I'm very hopeful, and I think there's already a lot going on. The third is to do with markets.
Yes.
That system so far did not start talking about markets. Again, it was a bit of a trust issue. Some countries felt like, why should I tell you how much I think I'm going to make good on my climate commitments? Am I going to deepen them or not? When you, meaning the others, have not made good on your financial commitments. So there was a bit of ping pong going on that one. And I think markets will come back to the table. Carbon markets, I'm hopeful will come back to the table, but I feel perhaps we're not ready yet for an international agreement on carbon credits and how that will be worked. But I think some of the rules of the game, as far as bilateral climate carbon trading discussions, will come back. So a lot more will be done at the end of this year on realizing a framework for carbon trading and the use of markets for climate change mitigation and adaptation.
All right, lovely. What I like was both of you sound very optimistic in a year, which, well, given the past year and how much gloom that has brought to all of us, but hopefully things are looking up, not just with the vaccine, but addressing the climate crisis, as we should rightly be calling it. It's been a sterling discussion. I've enjoyed it tremendously. There's so much to learn from both of you. Thank you so much for kickstarting Earth Talks in 2021 with not just your insights, but a very powerful discussion. Thank you so much.